exploring the intersection of resilient technology, organizations, and people. REdeploy.
Hi everyone, my name is Hannah Foxwell. I am from the UK. I am a delivery manager in the customer success team at Pivotal, but as Mary said, I'm also really invested in the technology community. I organise DevOpsDays London. I also organise the HumanOps meetup in London. But today I'm going to talk about why resilient systems require resilient people. And I'm going to start with a couple of really obvious statements. You are not immutable. You are not highly available, and you are ephemeral. There is no failover for you. There is no disaster recovery plan. There is no rollback. And no matter who you are, all of us have a breaking point. And it happens all too often that our work can push us to that breaking point. But there are ways that we can prevent it. There are ways that we can help ourselves, and there are ways that we can help the people around us. So today I'm here to talk about resilience. Not the resilience of our platforms, but the resilience of our people. Because when we're talking about resilience, the human components of our systems and platforms are very different to the infrastructure. As I mentioned, the HumanOps community was started in 2016. I've been involved in that from day one, and the aim of that was to start a conversation about the sustainability of our practices in operations. And one of the tenets of HumanOps is that the well-being of human operators impacts the reliability of systems. And I think we all instinctively know this to be true. Nobody does their best work if they've been up all night dealing with incidents. Nobody makes the best decisions when they're under pressure and we're feeling stressed. And although automation is improving all of the time, we're not yet at a point where our systems can exist without some kind of human intervention or management. The human factors in our system matter. So today I want to talk about resilience and why resilient systems require resilient people. We'll start with a very simple definition of resilience, the ability to recover quickly from difficulties. We spend a lot of our time thinking about the resilience of our systems. It's our day job. We're here at a conference to talk about this and to share our experiences with each other. But how much time have we spent thinking about and working on our own resilience, or making efforts to actively improve the resilience of our teams? So I'm here to make a case for human resilience, something that we don't spend enough time thinking about and even less time working on improving. In my career, I've worked in a lot of different organizations, from startups to big enterprises, software development teams, and consultancies. And I can tell you that it's the people problems that are always the hardest ones to fix. People are more difficult to work with than machines. And when you break a person, he can't be fixed. And yet so many of us have experienced burnout and stress in the course of our careers. And I'm really not okay with that. I think it's an increasing trend in our industry that we're accepting this as normal, and I think we need to do better. But I wanted to start at the outset by saying that if you have experienced burnout throughout the course of your career, this is not a talk about what's wrong with you or what you should have done better. This is talk about actually how we can all get better at this together, how we can make positive steps towards creating more sustainable working environments. In the course of my career, I've become convinced of one thing, and that is that change is constant. How many of us in this room have had to learn a new technology in the past 12 months? Right? If I can get a show of hands. Yeah, that's a lot. How many in the past 1 month? Yeah. How many have learned a new technology this week? Yeah, we still got hands. So we're all going through some kind of change, and the pace of change, especially in technology, is increasing, and coping with that change requires resilience. But when we talk about change. And when we try to manage that change within our teams, we often approach the problem like a software engineering project. And here's the thing about humans. You can't just upgrade them overnight. There's no clean cutover. There's no A-B switch where you can go from mode A to mode B. Unlike infrastructure, making changes to people is hard. And you're human yourself. You understand what it's like to go through changes, whether it be large-scale organizational changes, whether it be the technology platform that you're working with. We understand that these changes take a toll, but we often approach them like it's just another software engineering project. And as I said, the only thing that I'm convinced that will remain the same throughout my career in technology is that we will be constantly changing. So I'm going to digress for a minute and talk about my very first day at work. So this wasn't the first day of work generally. I had weekend jobs while I was at school. This was the first day that I arrived at a large corporate after finishing university. So we were sent off to this very nice country hotel, and a load of very important executives in suits were rolled in to give us our corporate brainwashing and strategy. And we all wore suits because we thought that that was important. I did not realize the tech community was actually did not require that I looked smart. It took me a long time to realize that, actually. But there's only one thing that I remember from my corporate brainwashing day, and that was this one guy who told us about the well of despair. And he said, you're going through a massive life change. You're leaving education and you're going into full-time work. You're probably moving house. You're making new friends. Everything about your life is changing, and you're going to experience something called the well of despair. He said, it all seems great right now, but pretty soon you're going to realize what you don't know yet. And you're going to see that there's a massive mountain to climb before you can become effective in your job. And you're going to reach the well of despair, and you're going to feel like it's impossible to ever be successful. And the important thing about him talking us through this is that he made it normal. He made it okay for us to think about that. So instead of going through those first few months of work pretending that we were all wildly successful in our new careers, we had honest conversations with each other about how we were feeling. We'd slump down at lunchtime in the canteen and we'd be like, I am in the well of despair. I do not know what to do with this new project. And it was incredibly powerful. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the emotional cycle of change, which is what he talked us through on that day. So the emotional cycle of change is probably something that we can all relate to loosely. It's obviously not very often as simple as this, but it starts with uninformed optimism. So we want to make a change. Maybe we want to go to the cloud. Maybe we want to introduce continuous delivery. Maybe we're doing something fundamentally different with our product management. Everything is hearts and rainbows at the beginning. We're in that place of uninformed optimism. And as we start to try and implement that change, we start to slump down into informed pessimism. Okay, so it's not as easy as I thought it was going to be. And that's when we can get caught in the well of despair, where everything feels impossible and you want to give up. Your motivation is absolute lowest. But then sometimes, if you persevere, you climb back up the slope through hopeful realism, and you reach the panacea of rewarding completion. This is more like the experience of working in tech today, because we're going through these changes constantly. It's the emotional cycle of changes, and it can feel like a roller coaster. We never have that rewarding completion. We never have that sense of stability that we've mastered our own domain, because everything is going to change overnight. What you thought was important last year is suddenly not as important anymore. And I think Thomas Friedman illustrates our current experience with technology really well in his book, Thank You for Being Late. Technology is advancing exponentially, but our human adaptability is finite. We are human. We are not evolving as fast as our technology, so we need to find coping mechanisms. We need to find ways of learning faster, governing smarter, and adapting to the changes that are happening around us in our careers. So what are the factors that can help us get better at this? How can we make it a little less uncomfortable? How can we make sure that we're avoiding that well of despair where everything feels impossible? And the answer is resilience, the ability to recover quickly from difficulties. And the good thing about resilience is that it can be improved. Resilience is no more than a set of skills that with practice you can get better at and can be greatly influenced by other factors in your working environment. Resilience is not a trait that either people have or do not have. It involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed in anyone. And sometimes we do talk about resilience as though it's an innate personality trait. Some people are more resilient than others, but that's simply not the case. In the study of the psychological resilience, a developmental psychologist called Emmy Warner followed a group of people through 40 years of their lives to study the resilience of those people. And the interesting thing is that it was not an innate quality that you could see in certain individuals from youth through adolescence and into adulthood. Actually, it changed over time, and it was impacted by factors in their environment, and it was greatly improved by certain behaviors and thoughts and actions that were common with the people who were maybe more resilient in the face of adversity. It was a developmental psychologist called Norman Garmisi who turned the tables on resilience research. Instead of looking at the negative reasons why some people faltered in the face of challenges and setback, he started looking for the positive reasons why some people succeeded. He coined the term protective factors, which is, by definition, the elements of an individual's environment, background, personality that enables success despite the challenges faced. So we're going to talk a bit about protective factors and how we can develop them in ourselves and how we can provide those protective factors for the people around us. What studies have found is that individuals with greater resilience have an internal locus of control. And basically what that means is that those individuals believe that the outcomes of a certain situation are within their control and determined through their hard work, attributes, and decisions. People with an external locus of control are more likely to feel like no matter what they do, they can't have an impact. They believe the outcomes are determined by fate and independent of hard work or the decisions they make. It's a very subtle difference in terms of how you think about a problem. Do you throw up your hands and say, this is impossible? Or do you say, right, okay, this is really hard. What am I going to try next? And this sense of an internal locus of control is closely linked to something called a growth mindset, which you might have heard about before. A growth mindset is basically the sort of belief that if you do not have a skill, you can learn that skill. And having an internal locus of control is that your actions and behaviors, the work you put in, will have an influence on the outcome. So this is a little bit of like Hannah science. But when I think about the changes that we desire to make in our organizations, I think about how that influences the locus of control, the belief or assumption that we have a direct impact on the outcome through our work. And so when we talk about DevOps, we always talk about culture. And if you think about the way that organizations used to be managed, very hierarchical, command and control style management, and compare that to the trust and autonomy that it takes to collaborate effectively and have teams work independently. Now, which one is going to encourage that internal locus of control? Who's going to feel like their actions have a direct impact on the outcomes? We look at the technology that we're using. So I've worked in organizations where we were delivering quarterly releases of really highly dependent monolithic applications, and the code base was so complicated and so old that it was very hard to predict what was going to happen when we made those changes. Compare that to what we talk about today when we talk about loosely coupled microservices. Which team is going to feel more like they can predict the outcome based on their actions? Which team is going to feel more like they're in control? And which team is going to be more resilient? And then we look at tools. Again, when I was a release coordinator on this very monolithic legacy system that we were managing, these large, high-impact releases that we delivered quarterly were major events, and it was really hard to predict where they would go wrong and what would go wrong. Compare that to continuous delivery, where we advocate for shipping small changes frequently. Who's going to feel more like they're in control of the outcomes of their work? Who's going to be more resilient? And I was chatting to one of my friends who works in charity, and she's also interested in resilience, but from a completely different context. When we talk about sort of improving the resiliency of children who grow up in like extreme poverty with a lot of disadvantages, we want to work on how we can improve the resilience of those people and enable them to be successful. And I think this is a really interesting definition for us to look at. So in the context of exposure to significant adversity, resilience is both the capacity of individuals to navigate their way to the psychological, social, cultural, and physical resources that sustain their well-being, and their capacity individually to collectively or to negotiate for these resources to be provided in culturally meaningful ways. That's a long definition, and so I like to paraphrase it. When faced with a challenge, can I navigate my way to a solution? Do I understand where I can get help or information when I need it? Things like this could be as simple as, do I know what Slack channel to ask my question in? Is the documentation for this system up to scratch? Do we have an internal wiki? And it can be more informal than that. It's like, do I have a colleague who I can trust that I can go to and ask for help when I need it? So let's talk a little bit more about what we can do to improve resilience. So we've talked about the things that we can do to encourage this internal locus of control. But actually, research has found that in terms of external factors, caring, listening, and supportive relationships can massively help improve your resilience. And these don't have to be your co-workers. This is your family, your friends, this is the communities that you engage with. Anybody can listen and take an interest. You don't have to necessarily have all the context about whatever challenge that you're working through at work. I probably don't have any answers for you today, but I will volunteer myself that if you want to talk a problem through with me, and I'll be around at lunchtime, please feel free to come and share your problems with me. I'm here and I'm happy to listen. So let's talk about some other really simple ways that we can encourage resilience within our teams. Trusting people and giving them the authority to make their own decisions will obviously encourage them to think for themselves, but also encourage them to see that their actions have a result on the outcome, to feel more in control of their own destiny, if you like. To make sure that when those people are being trusted to make their own decisions, make sure they have a sense of shared purpose. Make sure they're all pulling in the same direction when they're doing that. Focusing on the opportunity is one way you can do that. Paint a vivid picture of where we're all going together, and allow people to find their own way there. Develop coaching skills within your team. So like I said, finding a way to answer yourself is so much more powerful than being told what the answer is. Equipping your team with coaching skills and enabling them to help each other figure out the answers for themselves is incredibly powerful. And I would always advocate for people going through some kind of coaching course because it's incredibly useful. Creating an environment where your colleagues support each other, where we help each other through hard times, where we know each other personally, is going to help build resilience. Providing constructive feedback when things don't go well is also very important. We don't want to create a space necessarily where things do go wrong and they're not addressed. Everybody needs to know that they can and should be trying to improve all of the time. And then finally, building a community can be really powerful. So if you're in a small organization, seek help from the technology communities that exist outside. If you're in a large organization, why not try to create one internally? Build that sense of community. Have people outside of your direct environment that you can share your problems with and you can bounce ideas off. Next, I want to talk about your own resilience, what you can do to become a more resilient person. It seems obvious, but we need to take breaks. If you're exhausted, then you're not going to be working at your best. You need to look after yourself, number one. Observing your thoughts is a really good way of mitigating the impacts of stress. So practicing things like mindful meditation, I was super, super thrilled to see that we have a whole talk on mindfulness at this conference tomorrow because it's such an incredibly powerful tool. Being able to inspect your own thoughts and your own feelings, disassociating yourself from the sources of that stress and taking a step back to decide what to do next is incredibly powerful. Rather than being stressed, recognize that you're feeling stressed. It's very subtly different, but very powerful. Look after your health. We talk about 2 pizza teams, but don't eat pizza every night. It's not good for you. Like, look after your health. As technologists, we tend to spend an awful lot of time in our heads. Our brains are part of our bodies. Look after your body, and your brain will function better as well. And finally, don't be afraid to talk about it. If you're feeling some feelings, share them. Actually, you might give someone else permission to share their feelings as well. Don't suffer in silence. Find a space, a community, or people within your team who you can talk to, who you can confide in, and you'll be much more resilient. Implementing change is always hard. And sometimes it can feel like you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But I'm here to tell you that that's absolutely, completely normal because we're dealing with people. But the more resilient you are and the more resilient your team is, the better you are equipped to handle the challenges and the changes that are ahead of you. Because I'm convinced that if we choose a career in technology, then we're on this roller coaster ride. The ground will move underneath us, I don't know how many times before the end of our career, and that is what we should expect, and we need to equip ourselves with the skills to deal with that. So I'll end this talk where I started. The well-being of human operators impacts the reliability of your systems. The resiliency of your human operators will impact the resiliency of your systems. So please, look after your people. We are not like machines. We are flesh and blood, thinking, feeling, emotional, human being components of our systems, and we are important. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a real privilege to be able to speak at this conference.